yet they all seemed vaguely familiar, as if I'd seen them in an old dream or a recurring nightmare. When I reached the last page, my blood froze. In red script that looked like it was real blood, a short sentence was written. "It all begins when you speak your name among them." My entire body trembled. I realized I was standing on the edge of a deep abyss, one step enough to plunge me straight into the heart of the curse that surrounded us. But the question that haunted me continued: am I ready to face what awaits me in the darkness, or am I just another victim in an endless series of stolen lives? I didn't sleep that night, but sat by the window, watching the moon's reflection on the scattered trees at the edge of the forest. The night was eerily still, and every whisper of whine through the branches amplified my inner trembling. I tried to comprehend everything I had experienced since setting foot in this ominous house, but the density of my thoughts and obsessions made my head feel like a closed room filled with endless buzzing voices. How could one family keep so many dark secrets? How could humans succumb to the presence of demons among them and turn them into a means of survival and expansion? The more I tried to find a logical answer, the more I found myself sinking deeper into the mystery, as if I were searching a maze with no exit. At dawn, I could bear it no longer. I felt something inside me forcefully pushing me toward the cellar, as if a hidden call compelled me to return there, to the open wound that refused to heal. I descended with slow, ponderous steps, and each step of the stairs seemed to drag me deeper into the darkness. The air was unnaturally cold, as if the cellar held the chill of centuries of secrets and curses. But this time, things were different. The cellar wasn't as silent as I'd always known. Instead, there was a faint, intermittent whisper, as if hidden voices were arguing among themselves in a strange language I didn't know, a language resembling the groan of iron being crushed, or the creaking of rusty doors in a storm. I advanced cautiously until I discovered that the eastern stone wall wasn't entirely solid. Some stones protruded, others sunk, suggesting they weren't part of the original structure. I extended my trembling hand, and as soon as I touched the stones, I felt a chill unlike any I'd ever known, a chill that penetrated the skin and reached right to the bone. I pushed hard on one of the stones, and it moved like a secret key, opening a narrow, dark passageway I'd never seen before. That passageway felt like the stomach of an old house, slowly swallowing me up. The smell was suffocating, and the walls were filled with symbols carved with demonic precision. Symbols that seemed strangely familiar, as if whispering to me that I had known them for a long time. The deeper I walked into the corridor, the air grew heavier, and my chest tightened, until it seemed as if this place was rejecting my presence and expelling my breath. I reached a small circular hall at the end of the corridor, in the middle of which stood a massive black stone block shaped like an altar. The stone was saturated with a strange odor, a mixture of mold, smoke, and ancient blood. Around it lay unlit candles and clay bowls containing the remains of bones, some thin and small like animal bones, others larger and more reminiscent of human remains. I slowly approached the altar, my heart racing with every step. Suddenly, I felt movement behind me. I quickly turned around, but there was no one there. Yet the whisper returned, this time clearer than before, coiling around my head like a snake. "You are not one of us. Come back before your soul is taken. Blood accepts no strangers." I felt fear creeping into my bones, but curiosity was stronger. I reached out and touched the black stone. At the same moment, a violent tremor swept through me, and I saw a succession of images lashing out at me like a storm. Mysterious rituals, people in demonic masks making sacrifices, muffled screams, blood being poured on this altar, and faces from the family that inhabited the house, but their features were different, harsh, dark, more like the faces of demons than humans. I quickly withdrew my hand, breathing heavily as if I had just emerged from underwater. I felt something embedded within me, a part of the darkness that had seeped deep within me and would never leave. I was no longer the same person who had entered the cellar. I hurried out of the hall, hearing whispers following me like a heavy shadow. My steps were quick, but the voices were even faster, laughing, repeating my name, and promising more. When I reached my room, I closed the door tightly and sat there trembling. The house was no longer an ordinary house. It had turned into a vast prison surrounded by unseen eyes. As I write these lines, I feel the walls watching me, the ceiling leaning closer to me, and darkness creeping deeper inside me. And worse still, I'm no longer sure if I'm still myself, or if I've become something else, slowly being born inside this body. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, staring into space as if searching for an answer that wouldn't come. The sky looked strange, its moon pale like a dying body, and the stars distant as if fleeing an approaching dark fate. The entire village was silent, but that silence wasn't a comfort. It was heavy, suffocating, punctuated every now and then by distant screams that dissolved into nothingness. I could hear whispers, not only from outside but also from within, as if hidden entities had found their way into my mind. Non-human footsteps echoed throughout the house, slow but heavy, as if those walking carried the burden of centuries of curses. I thought dawn would free me from this night, that light would rescue me from the jaws of terror, but with the first rays of morning, I found a letter outside the door that my eyes were never meant to see. A tattered piece of paper made of old leather, its scent resembling that of a long-opened grave. When I touched it, I felt a chill run through my fingers, as if it were stripping away my warmth. When I read what was written in crooked, inhuman script, my breath nearly stopped. "We have chosen you. Your blood will open the doors for us." The words were short, but they weighed more than 1,000 books. My mind was filled with questions. Who chose me? What doors are they talking about? And why do I feel as if I've lived this moment before? Before I could find an explanation, my uncle entered the room. His face was exhausted, his eyes sunk in black shadows, as if night had slept in them for years. I didn't need to ask. He looked at the paper with eyes I knew so well, then muttered in a low voice. "The curse is complete. Blood is the key, and you are the one who will hold the seal." I stepped back involuntarily, feeling the ground shake beneath my feet. I tried to deny it, but his words crept inside me, awakening a part of the truth I had been running away from. He approached me, placed his cold hand on my shoulder, and whispered, as if handing over a deadly secret. "Centuries ago, our family made a pact with the forces of darkness. A pact that guaranteed our survival, in exchange for a sacrifice for each generation of one of their sons. This way, the family would not become extinct, and today, it's your turn." His words were a dagger, and I was the bound victim. I tried to scream, but my voice betrayed me. I wanted to curse him, to call him crazy, but he didn't need convincing. My heart betrayed me, beating frantically, as if something inside me already knew this was my fate. I fled. I left the house, running aimlessly, searching for an escape. The fields that had once been my refuge had become a trap, and the trees I'd grown accustomed to touching seemed twisted, like living creatures stretching out their branches to seize me. The familiar path was no longer the same. The distances were lengthening, the shadows moving despite the sunlight, and the wind carried a groan like the wailing of the dead. Suddenly, he appeared before me. An indescribable being, enormous in stature, his features obliterated, his face a black void from which hung wisps of smoke like burnt souls. His mouth didn't move, but his voice pierced my head, as if he were perched inside my skull. "You will not escape. Your name has been written from the beginning." I fell to my knees, gasping like someone about to die. Between the desire to flee and the surrender to despair, I no longer knew who I was. Am I just a victim, a chess piece on an ancient board? Or am I the key, the final link that demons have waited for centuries to unlock doors that should never have been opened? It was day, but all I saw was darkness creeping around every corner. Light no longer meant safety. Silence no longer meant peace. Everything was upside down. Only then did I realize that the real question wasn't, how do I survive? But, what will happen to the world if I fail? I no longer distinguish between night and day inside this cursed palace. Time here doesn't flow like it does outside. It stops, loops around, and then brings me back to the same spot, as if I were trapped in a hellish cycle. The walls slowly bleed, streaks of dark blood seeping between the stones like pulsating arteries. Sometimes I thought that if I stuck to the wall, I would hear its pulse, the pulse of a living, hungry palace, swallowing whoever entered it, becoming a part of its body. The air was suffocating, saturated with the smell of rot mixed with the scent of smoke from no source. This smoke slowly creeps across the floor, like a living creature stalking my steps. Every time I tried to breathe, I felt my chest tighten, as if something wanted to block my air. I initially thought I would get used to what I was seeing, but I discovered that getting used to horror is just another form of madness. That day, I stood in front of a door I had never dared open before. It was covered in twisting black lines, resembling magical writing carved by a trembling hand. The more I looked at them, the more I felt a severe headache, as if the symbols themselves were penetrating my brain. I pushed the door open slowly, and a long creaking sounded like the groan of a dying person. The room was dark inside, but old portraits hung on the walls. I approached the first portrait, and it depicted an old man with distorted features, his eyes unnaturally wide, and his mouth formed a cold smile dripping with hatred. At first, I thought it was just a figment of my imagination, but when I moved a little, I saw those eyes slowly following me, as if alive. On the table in the center of the room lay an old book, its cover made of cracked leather and smelled of blood and smoke. On the cover was a circular symbol surrounded by the faces of small demons, their features raised as if they were preparing to laugh. I hesitantly extended my hand, and as soon as I touched the cover, I felt a stinging heat pierce my fingers and reach my veins. I opened the book, and the words moved like black worms writhing across the page. I struggled to read one of the lines, which read, "Whoever owns this book holds the key to summoning those who have resided within the family's blood for centuries." I froze. This was no ordinary book, but an eternal contract, a testament to a dark pact between the family and demons. Suddenly, I heard slow footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. Still, I felt a cold breath pass over my neck, and a whisper echoed, "You're next." I slammed the book shut, and the walls shook. The paintings on the walls began to change shape, the human faces melted, turning into cracked skulls. Each image represented a different death, like prophecies. I ran toward the door to escape, but it slammed shut behind me with a force that shook the earth. I tried to open it with my trembling hands, but to no avail. Then I raised my head and saw what froze my blood. The old man in the first picture was no longer motionless. Half of his body emerged from the painting, extending his long black hand towards me. His fingers were like nails, and his face was skinless, mere bones covered in smoke. I backed away in terror until my back was against the wall, the book still in my hands. All I could muster was my survival instinct, so I held the book up in front of me as a shield. Suddenly, its pages lit up with a dim red light, and the old man's hand stopped in the air, a breath away from me. I heard his voice echoing in my head. "You are the heir of the blood, you will not escape." Then I realized the harsh truth. I was no longer just a lost witness to this nightmare. I had become part of the ritual, a piece of the curse my family had inherited centuries ago. The entire room began to close in on me, its walls closing in as if trying to swallow me up. But amid the terror, a strange strength arose within me, a rage mixed with deep despair. I swore that I would uncover the secret of this book, even if I had to come face to face with the demons. Because I'm starting to realize that the real horror hasn't even begun yet. Could no longer distinguish between night and day. Everything around me was immersed in a thick darkness. Even the sunlight filtering through the broken windows seemed dim, as if it were passing through a black veil that obscured all life. I lived in a whirl of visions and nightmares, and the house itself was no longer a home, but a passage between our world and another, as if the walls concealed hidden gates that opened only to those destined for doom. Every corner of this place concealed a whisper, every dark corner harboring a secret that didn't want to be revealed. I no longer slept. If I closed my eyes for a moment, I saw decaying faces approaching me, reeking of death and decay. Even the hallway mirror no longer reflected my image as it was, but rather strange faces watching me coldly, then disappearing as soon as I screamed or closed my eyes. One night, while sitting in the old family room, I heard a whisper approaching my ear. It wasn't clear, but it was like a disjointed chant, like a ritual recited in a distant basement. I looked around, but found no one. The air, however, was chilly, as if an invisible hand had passed over my skin, leaving a lasting chill. Then I realized that the demons had returned to remind me of their presence, to announce that they hadn't left me for a single moment, that they were just waiting for the right moment to devour me. I raised my gaze to the opposite wall and saw something strange, shadows moving on their own, as if dancing in the heavy silence. I approached them and realized that they weren't just shadows, but distorted shapes, featureless faces, their eyes glowing like embers in a terrifying night. I tried to back away, but my legs froze in place, as if the ground had swallowed them, or as if the walls had sucked my breath away and bound me to their stony coldness. Suddenly, a loud scream split my head in two. It wasn't a human scream, it came from depths whose source I didn't know, from a place far beyond hell itself. I covered my ears, but the sound pierced me from within, hammering at my skull until I felt it would crack. I fell to the ground and saw the world change. The walls peeled away, revealing their living layers, the floor filled with cracks from which thick black smoke poured, the ceiling seemed to melt, dripping red blood onto my face. I began to crawl, searching for an exit at any cost, but wherever I turned, I found shadows surrounding me, chasing me like hungry wolves. I heard voices laughing mockingly, voices repeating my name as if they'd known it for thousands of years, as if calling me to a dark abyss from which there was no return. In a moment of utter despair, I stopped resisting. I closed my eyes, resigned to what was about to happen. But when I opened it again, I found myself in a dark room unlike any I'd ever known. The walls were covered in strange, deeply engraved symbols, each one oozing a faint red light, like living, pulsating hearts. In the center of the room lay a huge, open book, its pages black and its letters glowing like fire, devouring the air around them. I approached it despite the terror that gripped me. The words on the pages moved, twisting and intertwining, like living creatures crawling across the paper. I tried to read them, but they weren't in any language I knew. Yet, I felt them speaking directly to me, their meanings burning into my mind like fire in my flesh. Every word was read by my soul, not my eyes, and every sentence carved a new scar into my chest. Suddenly, the whisper came to me again, but this time it was as clear as a sword. You have reached the point of no return. I turned quickly and saw a shadow taller than any human, creeping from the wall like smoke, then gradually taking shape until it had a body, a distorted face riddled with scars. His black eyes were like holes, swallowing up all light, and his voice, when he spoke, made the ground tremble beneath him. The book has chosen you, and you will be left with no choice. Either you complete the path, or you will be erased from existence. He moved closer, until I could feel his cool breath on my face. I couldn't move, but my heart was screaming, pounding violently in my chest. When I looked back at the book, I found it had closed by itself, and on its cover appeared my name written in blood, as if my fate had been sealed forever. At that moment, I realized that I was no longer merely a witness to the family curse, but rather a part of its black thread, and my own blood became the ink between the pages of that book. As the words glowed brighter and brighter before me, I felt that the blood in my veins was no longer my own, but a fire coursing through me, slowly transforming me into something else, something no longer human. I could no longer distinguish the contours of my body from the shadows surrounding me. I stood in front of the mirror, the red symbols still glowing on the walls of the room, like the breaths of living creatures feeding off my soul, breathing in and exhaling a dark red vapor that filled the space with strange odors, the smells of burning and rotten blood. The room was no longer just four walls. It had transformed into a living entity watching me with an invisible eye. The black book was still in my hands, but my hands themselves no longer looked human. My fingers began to lengthen unnaturally, writhing like the claws of an unknown beast, and my nails grew hard and black, like iron cutting the air. My veins bulged and began to move beneath my skin like rabid snakes, crisscrossing, intertwining, and biting each other, until I felt as if my blood was no longer my own but a boiling poison within me. A terrible heat invaded my body, not human heat, but a hellish fire raging in every cell of me. My heart no longer beat normally. It pounded like a hammer against an anvil, and with each beat my bones creaked, making a strange crack as if my body was disintegrating from within to be reshaped. I couldn't stand, so I fell to the ground and screamed, but it wasn't a human scream. It was a long howl, as if all the wolves had gathered in my throat and screamed instead of me. The mirror in front of me no longer merely reflected my image, it had become a window into another world. Many faces appeared in it, distorted faces, smiling cold, poisonous smiles, as if waiting for my final mask to fall off. One face came so close it was pressed against the mirror glass. It looked terrifyingly like me, a dark version of me, but its eyes were as red as boiling blood, and its mouth was filled with long, sharp fangs, dripping with sticky black saliva. I heard his voice address me coldly, as if he knew all my weaknesses. "Didn't you long to be born again? This weak human body isn't worthy of you. You were different from the start. You've always been a stranger, and now is the time to show your true colors, to be free." I tried to scream, "No. I'm not you. I'm still human." But my voice came out distorted, a mixture of wheezing and heavy breathing, as if my throat had become a mouthpiece for darkness. Suddenly, I felt my shoulders being torn apart from the inside, as if my bones were crumbling to make way for something new. I screamed, blood spurting from my back, bleeding profusely, and my skin slowly crackling. In the shadows, I saw black shapes emerging and reappearing, like huge, pulsating wings, but not yet fully formed. They surrounded me, swirling around me as if they wanted to swallow me, as if they were waiting for the right moment to snatch away the last vestiges of my humanity. The black book suddenly opened violently, its pages turning rapidly until it stopped on a completely black page, written in glowing blood. "You have been chosen. There is no turning back." I tried to throw it away, but my hand stuck to it, my skin fused with it, and the book became a part of me. I tried to scream again, but the feeling of the dark force was stronger than my fear. All my veins glowed the same terrifying red that covered the walls, and I began to feel that I was no longer myself, that something else was stirring inside me. I fell to the ground, blood dripping from my nose, ears, and eyes. My sight began to see beyond the darkness. The walls were no longer walls, but opened onto a vast, endless abyss, a black void teeming with endless screams, with burning souls screaming my name. Thousands of whispers intertwined in my head, repeating my name over and over, beckoning me to take the first step toward nothingness. With difficulty, I raised my head and looked in the mirror, but I didn't see myself. I saw the being who had always watched me from afar, standing right where I was. He was smiling a devilish smile with his mouth open, his fangs dripping with hot blood, his eyes burning like embers. He slowly raised his hand, and I did the same, as if we had become one. And only then did I realize the horrific truth. There was no longer any difference between me and him. Only a moment separated us. The moment of complete fusion. The nights I spent inside the palace were only the beginning of a descent that was longer and deeper than I had anticipated. As the days passed, the walls began to lose their meaning as walls, and every corner of the place throbbed with a strange, inexplicable presence. By the 30th night, I felt I was no longer living among humans. Everything around me had transformed into a continuous nightmare, as if sleep and wakefulness were no longer distinct but had merged to create a reality from which there was no escape. That night, I awoke to the sound of loud knocking on my bedroom door. The knocking wasn't ordinary. it was more like a muffled thunderclap, insistently recurring, as if something was demanding my soul back. The knocking quickened, then began to pound the door with increasing violence, until I felt the wood would explode at any moment. My heart pounded in sync, each knock met with a shock in my chest. I stood up hesitantly, my hands trembling and my knees barely able to support me. Every step toward the door felt like it was leading me into the mouth of a deep abyss. As I placed my hand on the cold handle, the knocking suddenly stopped, and everything receded into a deathly silence, a silence so heavy it choked my breath. I didn't open it. I retreated fearfully to the center of the room, trying to convince myself that it was just an illusion. Suddenly, a voice whispered near my ear, a voice warm and unbearably close, as if it came from within me. "We've reached the end, and you no longer have the option of turning back." I could no longer bear the room. I opened the door and fled down the long corridor. The corridor stretched endlessly, its damp floor echoing with my footsteps as if they were chasing me. Along its sides were many doors, some opening into a black void like a hole swallowing the light, others into rooms filled with muffled screams, the screams of women and children echoing from afar, and some into scenes from a past I'd forgotten I'd lived. I saw myself as a child sitting in a dark room, staring at an endlessly bare wall, and I saw my mother crying silently by the window, while behind her a tall shadow reached out toward her. Each door was a cursed story, and each scene ripped a piece of my mind apart. I tried to run, but the further I advanced, the longer the corridor grew, as if I were stuck in a vicious circle. Finally, a massive door appeared before me, larger than any other. It was made of burnt wood, dripping with ash, and its rusty door swayed as if it were breathing. I hesitated for a moment, but an invisible force pulled me toward it, as if I were bound by invisible chains. As soon as my hand touched the handle, the door opened by itself, with a sharp creak that pierced my ears. Behind it, a vast hall appeared, bathed in a blood-red light emanating from nowhere. Bodies hung from rusty chains from the ceiling, moving lightly in a current of air I couldn't feel, as if they were breathing or whispering amongst themselves. The smell of decay and blood filled the space, and my stomach felt like it was teetering. In the center of the hall stood me. Another version of myself, with the same features but a crooked smile distorting my face, his eyes completely black, like two bottomless abysses. He smiled and said in a voice that sounded exactly like mine, but it was hollow, echoing like an echo from another world. "You're too late, everything is starting to end." I walked toward him fearfully, but each step made my body feel heavier, as if the earth was trying to swallow me or as if the gravity of the hall was bound to my soul alone. The closer I got, the more I felt my soul being torn from my body, as if something was reaching inside my chest to tear me out. The other version of me didn't move, but stood there, smiling, as if waiting for my final mask to fall. Suddenly, the red light went out, and the hall was swallowed up in complete darkness. But the voices didn't disappear. Thousands of whispers crept into my mind, then turned into intermittent screams, the screams of men, women, and children, as if trapped inside me. I tried to close my ears, but the screams were coming from within, ravaging me from within. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself sitting on the floor, exhausted. The other version had disappeared, but in its place stood a huge mirror covering half the hall. I approached it hesitantly, and saw my distorted image, my eyes empty like two dark holes, and a sinister smile on my lips. I raised my hand to touch the mirror's surface, trying to convince myself that it was just a reflection, but the hand touched me from the inside out first. A cold hand emerged from the glass and gripped my wrist with a terrifying force, a force that made every muscle in my body tremble. Only then did I realize that I wasn't facing a nightmare, but the beginning of the end. That what I had thought was my shadow, my reflection, was nothing but reality, and I was nothing but an illusion.